So this last October, I decided to make a little horror game, and I wanted to finish it in time for people to play it for Halloween. I finished it. I got it to a point that was playable, and there was multiple endings, and it was cool. Yeah, I was really proud of it. But the thing is, I finished it like on the night of Halloween. So it kind of defeated the purpose to like make that deadline. So I had a choice at this point. I could either release the game and let people play it post Halloween in this okay state that it was in, or I could go to Salem, Massachusetts to get inspired by the history of witchcraft and see what type of ideas come to mind. And then I could expand on the story, the branching narrative, maybe even some mechanics, just some extra stuff for the game to really flesh it out and make it something special, and then release it after that. The Salem trip really was something special. It was very illuminating and inspiring. The history of witchcraft is very dark and tragic, and so that sobering part of it I definitely got while I was there. But I was also surprised to see how generations of women have co-opted the symbol of the witch and have made it something that they celebrate and something that they can have fun with. There is so much fascinating imagery and ideas that come with witchcraft, and I wanted to implement all those things before I would go to Tokyo. Before I came, I'm in Tokyo right now. This is my little spot in Shinjuku. I wanted to finish implementing those things into the Witch game before I came here, because I wanted to come here and just immediately get into the Tokyo game. That didn't happen. So the honest to God truth is that there was a lot of procrastinating. Don't get me wrong, I was playing a shit ton of the finals still. I still am playing a ton of the finals. Fucking the game, dude, the game is so I love that game so fucking. But besides that, I've also had to like make these videos. That's like a shit ton of work. I told myself like I'm going to stay here and like in this fucking apartment, you know, like I'm just going to sit at that desk and work on the fucking game until it's done. 2 weeks later, bro, I am very proud to say that it is not just like kind of finished or whatever. No, it is properly shipped off to fucking Steam for approval for the build. So as soon as they approve it, I'm gonna publish that shit. You can go fucking buy it. And it's done. So what I want to do in this video is give you a broad overview of the things that it took to make this game. Even though it's been about 2.5 months since I started the game, I'm telling you, man, like it's only been about an actual month of work on the game. And on top of that, what I would really like to do too is sort of offer what the price is of this, right? Because like a lot of the things that you use to expedite the process of game development is like buying assets and getting things that are already pre-made. And some of these things I'm in a good enough position where like I have enough of like a technical skill set that I could take kind of some even broken things or some things that are not quite there, and I could kit bash them and make them to be what I need them to be. And I'll show you a little bit of that in this video. So we're gonna kind of put together like a broad budget of how much I ended up spending on this game. So every time I buy an asset for the game, we'll have the budget go up, and by the end of this, you'll see like what it was that I probably spent around on it. And hopefully you'll learn a thing or two about like what it takes to make a game that's about this size by yourself, you know, and that you don't need like a huge team of people when you have literally the world is your team, because there's all these people out there who are like making and offering solutions that are generic enough that you can use in your own projects. That's what I really want, like one of the biggest takeaways to be here, because it's like, it's fucking cool, man, what you can do as like a solo developer. So this is how Witch Stories was made. Okay, so this is the Unity project for Witch Stories, and let's start breaking down all the things that came together to make the game. So first of all, we have the player's house here, and this was made from this free asset, the 3D retro medieval fantasy building kit. So you can see all these pieces are like modular, and it comes with these different textures and everything. So then there's the chicken coop outside, and the chicken coop is also pretty simple. That was made from this free asset pack. Okay, so I just used this wall over and over again. Same thing with these chickens. This was also in an asset. This is also an asset I got, which is why they are a little different in their quality. They're pretty low res. was. These nests are a model from one pack, and then the textures from another pack, so there's a lot of combining and mixing and matching in these sets. This tree here was also in one of the packs. Same thing with all this foliage and all these flowers and stuff. Here in the forest, same thing, all these trees, again, these are packs, and what's great about these ones is these actually came up with the LODs on them, so even in editor, as you move away from them, they'll lower in their resolution the further they are. It just helps with performance. So there's this one, which is the young woman's house, and this was like literally just right out of the box, plug and play. And then same thing with the old woman's house. Now let's get into the NPCs. So this witch, basically I have all the behaviors set up here. So this is when the witch encounters you and offers you something, and it asks, does the player have a baby? And if the answer is yes, then it steals the baby. If the answer is no, then it propositions you. Begin the sacrifice. You can see all these little pieces of logic to make sure that whatever circumstance the player is in, the witch has an appropriate response, and hopefully a cool response. And then here's just the chase player one. So there's like several situations in which the witch will chase the player, and this just fires off like that. And then the baby, if I focus in on the baby here. So the baby was one of the very few things that I had to model myself. So this was modeled in Blender. So the baby's face was from some stock photos that I found, I think on Unsplash or something like that. Same thing with the blanket. There were baby models out there, but none of them matched this kind of style where I wanted the baby all wrapped up. It handles a lot of the problems of animation, right? So I don't have to like animate hands and arms wailing around and stuff like that, right? There's a ton of programming on the baby itself. So the baby's treated like an object. That's why I have this object FSM here. It's just always in this depleting mood state, and you can see that it's always subtracting from this baby mood value every second, and it makes sure that it never goes below 0 or above 120. And when the player hushes the baby from a separate FSM, this FSM also receives that information, and it just adds a little bit before going back to depleting. And baby controls here is just stuff about whether or not the player is hushing it or placing the baby down. Then there is baby cry. This is just some logic on getting the baby to cry when they're in a bad mood, or to also prevent them from starting to cry if there's a conversation currently active. And it was just sort of a quality of life thing where I just didn't want the baby interrupting some dramatic moments when there is dialogue happening. Then there's the witch kidnap FSM. So when a witch kidnaps the baby after you've placed the baby down and you've like not kept your eye on it, the logic isn't actually coming from the witch. The logic is coming from the baby itself. And so the baby is actually going through all these checks right here. Do I have anti-witch? Does the player currently have me? Am I crying? Am I at home? Is the door locked? Is the husband dead? Is the fireplace lit? And there's all these value checks, and only if all the value checks are aligned does the baby get kidnapped. And there's sort of logic here too, where it's like, since it's supposed to be selling the illusion of the witch kidnapping the baby, if it's at home, the door will open, or if the door is locked, but the witch has the key or that kind of thing, then the witch will unlock the door, or what have you. And then the husband, he starts at the door. A lot of logic. You can see right here, there's like a whole ton of logic to go through. The husband has like a bunch of stuff that he has his first branching path here, where it's like, does he go hunt the hare or does he go to work? And when he's walking home, he also is actually setting this thing, his husband barks FSM, where he's checking if he's walking home, and he checks if the player's near, because on his way home he'll say something to you if you get near him. And then all these things always kind of end up back at checking whether or not the husband is poisoned. So that happens in several different places, because he'll eat his dinner up here, but there's a few things that can happen down here and over here that would sort of change the outcome if he was poisoned. So there's always these little checks to see if the player gave him poison. But if he's fine and he goes to sleep, then he'll sleep for a while, and he'll kind of just loop back up to go back to work in the morning. So then there's all these like endings here where he attacks the wife and he chases the wife, he goes to find the child, or he goes to burn the old woman's house, all these things. Basically all of the husband's logic is put into here. There's a few other things that are placed out here where it's like his footsteps or his anti-witch and his health and stuff. So this is taking care of what happens when you hit him with an axe. There's different versions, whether or not he's asleep or if he was awake when you killed him. And then the young pregnant woman, if we focus in on her. So she came from the same pack as the husband, the characters. And what I had to do was I had to take her into Blender and then just sort of distort her belly out to make her appear to be pregnant. So she was also, and that was like a simple like deform modifier that I had in Blender. And I just kind of pulled it out and rounded it off a little bit until it looked right. And behaviors, so in her behaviors, she has some pretty simple things going on. She has her foraging FSM and her go home FSM. So she kind of just goes back and forth between the two. And so for her, when she's foraging, she just kind of randomly sets a destination and then picks up fruit while she's there, and then she checks if it's time to go home. And that's pretty much it. She'll just kind of keep looping. And then when it is time to go home, she does that here in the go home FSM. The young woman, she has, if I activate this, there is a separate model with her dead body, which has been cut open. So basically I took this into Blender. I found a frame of a death animation that I put on her. I made like a sphere with a bunch of random noise around it, and I used it as a Boolean modifier on her body, so it subtracted that. So you can kind of imagine a very wiggly, lopsided ball that I made that I kind of put right here and then said subtract that from her. And then I just put some bloody guts texture in the middle to make it look like you cut her open to take the baby out. There's that, and then of course the baby is right here. This is the baby that she has inside of her, and presumably the player has wrapped up. So this is the same model as the other baby, but I did change the texture for the face, so it has a slightly, if you can tell, I think it's relatively noticeable. On top of that, I desaturated the baby's face to sort of suggest, that it's dead, and then of course put all the blood on it because it was a messy endeavor to get it out of the mother like that. So the thing about this baby is that it doesn't function at all like the other one. This one basically functions like just a solid object that you can pick up and put down, but it's just recognized by a bunch of condition checks in the game as an additional baby. So there's logic in the game with the witch and the sacrificing and the mortars and all that stuff, which will check if there is a baby, and it's sort of agnostic as to like what the baby is. But yeah, so that stays off until the player does that. And then there's the hair. So there's a bunch of logic in here for the witch hair versus just a normal hair, and I actually ended up not using any of this normal hair stuff. So this normal hair would have just followed you around all the time. The witch hair has very specific logic that sort of wants to always entice the player or other characters to go into the woods that way. So it'll always wait out here and try to get people to come, but if they're too far from it, it'll go back here, and it'll only progress towards the woods as long as the player and it are both getting closer towards the woods. So in that way, it has this sort of behavior where it's always trying to get you to go there. Now, the other thing about the hair too is that it'll check whether or not it attacks the chicken coop is also kind of baked in here. So the attack chickens, and of course, yeah, all these chickens, they'll sort of receive that information. If I go inside this chicken, they have some logic here for like laying their eggs on like a random timer and stuff like that. And then the interact lets you sit them up and put them down and all that kind of good stuff. But they also have the state here for if the hair attacks them. And there's also some logic in here for if they're hit with an axe, right? If the player attacks them. So when they make their eggs, right, they create their egg here. If I select this, I'll go into an egg. Now the egg also has some logic here, if I go in this, for the hair attack, and that makes it a cursed egg. And that's just a bool value, and that makes the egg behave a little differently. So in the egg drop FSM, it does a little check for whether or not it's cursed. And so there's a normal splat, and then there's a splat for if it's cursed. And that goes ahead and creates this spider scatter. So there's a little particle effect that I made for spiders scattering. Now, if I just play this right now, you just see like a bunch of things spraying out and falling into a void. See, it's like they all kind of pop up like that. But when they all land on a surface, they all scatter around. Now, what's cool is that this was actually an asset that I found that was just for like bugs. And so the original one was like roaches, but the asset pack also came with like these spiders that like dangle. And so I just took the images of the spider, kind of did a shitty job animating their legs, and made it into a spider scatter particle effect. And this asset pack actually ended up having a bunch of other particle stuff that I used for the game as well. So this was a solid find, this pack. So speaking of more particles, if I go to other houses, the old woman's house, you can see that there is an FSM for the old woman burning state. This has the first fire grow, fire spread sequence, and then the end. This lets me start the first fire, the particle effect. It lets me turn it on, slowly scales up, and then once it reaches its maximum height, then I start activating these larger fire particles. And I put little sound effects in between them and give some weight, some timers in between each of them. And I actually just like hand direct when each of the fires kind of pops on, and like the sound effects and all that kind of stuff. And so a lot of the sequences in the game are very handcrafted this way, where I just put little like specific timer values on them and turning things on and off. So if I select the big fire, just so you can see what it looks like. So that's like one of the placements, right? But presumably in this moment, like this one and like maybe a couple other ones get turned on at the same time. Now, you come to this place to talk to the old woman, and you also can talk to the other characters, and that was all handled with Pixel Crusher's dialogue system. So that's what this is. If I can just maybe husband first enters, right? So this is the first conversation that you have with the husband, and basically what I do is I just write all my dialogue in like a notepad. I just kind of scratch it all down. I had ChatGPT explain to me some of the basics of writing dialogue that sounds like it's from the 16 and 1700s, and then I do my best to put that together. And then after that, I ask ChatGPT to point out any errors I may have made, and then I kind of decide whether or not I want to keep those errors, just because they might sound cooler than the actual proper version of it would be. They're mostly pretty accurate, but also I took some creative liberties and I wrote things that might not, or at least that ChatGPT said were not correct all the time, just because I thought it sounded cool. So this is what the dialogue trees look like, and they kind of send off the events. I can send off events directly from these conversations to change things over here in the rest of the world. The prayer sequence is kind of interesting in that there's like it's almost like a quiz. There's like correct answers and incorrect answers, and then incorrect answers always feed over here, and then it kind of progressively goes through each of these other options. That's 1 strike, that's 2 strikes, and then 3 strikes you're out kind of thing. And then one more, like the 4th one, is when you get a big reaction out of your husband if you're just totally not getting these right. Otherwise, you'll get to the very end here and just kind of say amen, and your husband goes to sleep. The witch proposition, very similar thing. There's a lot of logic in here too. There's like checking conditions for whether or not there's a late proposition. This was sort of a thing I added into the game pretty last minute, because I realized you can get to a certain circumstance where the player might be at the witch's ceremony without actually ever having encountered the witch with their baby or something. I forget what it was, but there's so many different circumstances and contexts with all these like moving parts that it's really nice being able to say that, hey, this part of the conversation, don't activate it or don't let it happen if some other value is true or false or something, right? So now if I go back out to the scene, there's also this world boundaries. So the world edge, this is what the world's edge look like. I basically just put up a bunch of walls. There's even like a little blocker here for the opening door sequence. And I was just like, you know what? This game is already so on the rails. Like, I'm just gonna like hard code in an invisible wall so that the player can't leave in that first sequence. Then there's like the zone triggers. So for example, if I go to the witch encounter trigger, that's what this big green sphere here is, the witch encounter sphere. And basically this just checks when the player has entered it or not. And then that's what triggers the witch encounter. There's a few of these that aren't activated right now, that they turn on only after some other things have happened. There's like things with blood around. So like I have this chicken attack blood, and all it does is just activates where little splats of blood are throughout the world. In some scenes, there's supposed to be like trails of blood or like leftover blood or something like that. The NPCs have 2 different ways of traversing the world. They can either use Unity's built-in navigation system just to go directly from point A to point B across something, right? But I also created a little path system. So there's all these nodes that go along paths in the world. They're sort of like footpaths. The NPCs can just use that to traverse, and they'll kind of pick the closest one that they're to if they're off the path. Okay, and then there's also ambience and effects. So I have some things on where just changing the audio of daytime sound effects or nighttime ambience. Then I have like scurry sounds and random witch sounds. So these are sounds that I place throughout the world depending on the player's position and like where I want the witch to be positioned. And these are sort of things to create an atmosphere, but also to keep the player on their toes. Then there's these riches particles. This is for one of the endings. Baby hunt pivot. This is again for one of the endings. There's some ambience and effects that sort of only gets cued in depending on which ending you get. I use Master Audio for all the sound design and music cues in the game. It's really great. Lets me use some really simple plug and play occlusion calling. I don't use it everywhere, but in a few situations it does make sense to kind of, muffle the sounds of the baby or, something like that. Has a bunch of great PlayMaker integration as well. And then I have my game manager here, which sort of ends up being a hub for a lot of miscellaneous things. The dialogue events that the Pixel Crushers dialogue system sends off. I made a little FSM here that lets me change what happens when a conversation starts and when a conversation ends, which largely has to do with disabling or enabling controls for the player and stuff like that. Story progression, so I have this whole FSM here for like the beginning of the game and the actual kind of like the flow of the opening dialogue and making the player wake up and all that kind of stuff. So this happens in the beginning. Then there's like the endings manager here, and the endings manager just kind of keeps track of which endings the player has seen, and it just checks a bool value for those things, just so at the main menu of the game, the player can see how many endings that they've gotten. Then there's a sacrifice manager, which is for which thing the player wished for. Husband, find, child sequence. So it's almost like directing cutscenes, except they're not cutscenes. They're just things that are happening in the world. So they're scripted situations, they're sequences, but the player maintains their control. Yeah, and I mean, like, that's pretty much it. Like, Witch Stories is actually like a very simple, small game. I think that like a lot of, just a lot of the depth of it does come out of like being able to find all the nooks and crannies of these little things and how all these decisions, how little decisions can impact the ending in a pretty significant way. So mechanically speaking, it's all pretty simple. It's been one of the easiest games I've ever had to make because everything is so not systemic. Everything is so explicitly placed, especially if you go over here to my dialogue system thing and go to the variables. It is a pleasure to say something like player is home or young woman is dead. Like that's a value about a specific character. So that's really great to just kind of like say explicitly certain values about specific characters and specific events and specific items, etc., etc. Because I come from a world, making memories of a spy and stuff, where everything is very systemic and has to be generic. And something like this just could not exist. So it was a real pleasure to sort of like make something that felt really big, and to do it so quickly, and to do it with very little hiccups. Using something like Pixel Crush's dialogue system and PlayMaker really just was like, it was a pleasure to just speed through development. All right, so this Raven asset was $11. I used that, so that's $11. Variety effects, I think I also probably got this for like 16 bucks. I use this not only for fire, I use some of the color fired effects, but oh yeah, for the fireflies and some smoke and wind and some gusty kind of things. A lot of atmosphere. Oh, and the bugs one, I think that's where so you can see here they have like the roaches, and I changed the graphics. I just brought in the texture to Photoshop and put spiders instead. And then I also used the candles and stuff like that. This one was very well worth the money. This is probably one of the best investments I made in the game because I'll be able to use this for future projects as well. Okay, so 16 bucks. Retro horror template. So this is where I got the witch asset actually. Let's just say I spent $5 on this. But you can see that this woman right here is about as close as you can get, but I had to sort of take off her clothes and modify her a little bit, but they give some really cool parameters here to change all that stuff up and give you exactly what you need. Okay, so this is a great asset. This was perfect for the witch model. $5, great. Blood splatter decal package. Free, so it doesn't even matter. I used that all over the fucking place. It was great. It was free. What's this? Retro foliage. So this one was $30, and I don't believe I got a discount on it. But this helped the performance of the game so much. I was using these other unoptimized things before, and it was fucking up the performance. I even had to put in something where it would turn off my trees while I was in editor, just so I wouldn't get performance hits. And on top of that, the trees actually look better than the other free assets that I had. So this is great, and I believe I would very likely use this in future projects as well. So probably very much worth the $30. Easy Soft Bone. This was free. I was going to use it to make the witch's hair dynamic. I did some experiments with that, but ended up not using it. Doesn't matter. It's Fantasy Map Assets Pack. I use this for the UI of the dialogue and stuff like that. This has been great. I used it a lot. It looks fucking wonderful. Free, wonderful. Medieval House. This was $5. Great. I used it as is, and I think so is the next one, right? Is that what this one? It's also $5, so call it a tenner for 2 of these houses. Super duper worth it. Survival Village Props. I use this for the chicken coop, so free, great. Animated goat and sheep. I brought in this goat, and the animations were awesome, but I never implemented the feature to have the goat stuff in it. Maybe if people really love this game, I'll do a patch one day, a very long time from now, to add in some additional content that would have the goat stuff. The random prefab placer, free. Use this to place a lot of things, actually, a lot of the trees and stuff. This was great. It's a little buggy in that it doesn't put much of a buffer between your clicks, so it'll just add as much as you can, and sometimes it'll end up like double placing things, but more or less it did what I needed it to do. It's free, great. So this one I ended up using a bunch of stuff from. It even has, you know, so there's the young woman, right? But this is when she was just normal. I had to I had to impregnate her, so to speak. There's the husband model. I used some of these book models. That's been good. You know, I used from like the Bible and stuff like that. Some of these cups and little things like that. This was a really good pack, and it was only $10. Purchased for $10, so that's great. So I got this one for $1. I think the only thing I used from this pack was the nests for the chicken, or the hay. Oh, that's what I used. These hay bales and these like baskets. I don't know how much time it saved me. I guess I probably could have opened up Blender to do some of this stuff. But everything else I got from Itch was free, basically. That's fucking amazing.
Another expense that I had to consider was sound effects. There are sites for free sound effects out there, like freesound.org and a handful of other places, but you really do have to dig, and the quality isn't always quite there. And also the actual licensing of the sound isn't always just straightforward. You can use it like full stop. And because of that, sometimes it can actually help to pay for a sound effects library. So I paid $5 a month for a pretty decent little library, and a good amount of the sound effects definitely came from there. So it's been a combination of that place, which is $5 a month, also freesound.org, bringing them into Audacity to touch them up, combine them, chop them up, you know, really tweak them to make something pretty cool. Because there's a lot of sounds in the Witch game that are very hodgepodge, that are handcrafted and designed, that you can't just like pull from a sound effects library. And on a related note, I also had to do voices for the game. A lot of indie games usually just kind of skip that part or put the little like text sound effects for them. But I really thought that it would really add to the atmosphere and the overall experience and the immersion if there was some voice acting in it. Now, I am by no means the greatest voice actor in the world, but I felt like for what I was writing, I felt confident in pulling off what I needed to do. And I had fun doing it. It was a lot of fun performing the dialogue that I had written. I don't get very many opportunities to perform that way. So that was cool. And I basically did every single voice. I did the husband. I did the opening sort of mysterious voice at the beginning. I did the old lady. I was actually going to look for an old lady for a while, but I ended up doing it myself. I did the voice of like Satan / the witch. It's mostly like Satan's voice. It's not really the witch talking. But there was one voice that I tried and failed at. And the voice was the voice of the young woman. And so here I'll play a clip of me trying to do the young woman's voice, which by the way is like putting on a voice, but I tweaked it in Audacity a little bit.
I trust thou art aware by now of the witch that dwelleth within these woods.
And trust me, I looked up like voice changers, like, you know, AI tools to just modulate my voice and stuff like that. And nothing was quite working. I was like, you know what, I think this is actually a voice that I have to like hire somebody for. So I went to voices.com and that's where I hired Tiffany Purdue. She was great. She was very responsive, needed very little notes, knew exactly kind of what needed to be done. Just like a couple days later, I had her voice in. It was just under $100. I think I paid something like $90 for that, which I think is very fair considering like the turnaround time, like the notes, and the it's not that much dialogue, but like really to be able to deliver like a high quality audio file, especially on that timeline, totally worth it. Other than Tiffany, I did the rest of the voice myself, and they are all again very heavily processed to shit. Like I pitch down my voice and do some weird textural things, and a lot of designy shit went into the voices. If they're behind a door or whatever, I just like hard mixed in a low pass filter so it sounds it sounds muffled, and that's something I could have handled on like the side of the engine where I just put it behind something because I have the occlusion in master audio. But like just running through this, like trying to get shit done as fast as you can, it was easier to just literally bake in the muffled low pass sound on some of those things. Another thing related to audio was the music, and that was something that was mostly pretty straightforward thanks to MuseOpen. MuseOpen is a site that has a lot of that. It's sort of a how would you describe MuseOpen? So let me just see. MuseOpen says, we provide recordings, sheet music, and textbooks to the public for free without copyright restrictions. Put simply, our mission is to set music free. So this site is fucking awesome. It's mostly only good for classical music, which is perfect for what I'm doing, because this game needed classical music. So I spent a shit ton of time, like whole afternoons and evenings, many days, many hours of going through YouTube playlists of classical music and trying to like dial in like what type of genre specifically of classical music, making playlists, going through other people's playlists, and then eventually sort of landing on some things that I thought would work well in the game, and I would search it here on MuseOpen. MuseOpen had a lot of the things, but not all of the things. But a lot of these like also have like set attribution or no commercial licensing. Sometimes they would have something, but I couldn't use it for a commercial project. So that kind of sucks. But for the most part, I was able to find everything I wanted, and the copyright restrictions or the licenses fell into line with what I'm doing. That was great. I found a lot of really good music through MuseOpen. But there's one song in the game that I made, actually, and it was because what I wanted was some of that like atonal chorus kind of sound, like if you know Ligeti. I wish I could play Ligeti on here, or Ligeti, or I don't know how the fuck you pronounce his name. There's a few Ligeti tracks in 2001: A Space Odyssey. There's also Penderecki. There's a few of these composers out there that make this sort of like kind of shit. That's what I did. Because I couldn't find any copyright-free versions of their music, I guess it's like contemporary classical, and because of that, they haven't quite hit their pieces haven't really hit the public domain or are in a place where you can record your own version or anything like that. So I had to make my own, and that's what I did. I sat there and literally sort of like just tried to make the sounds that I hear from those Ligeti tracks. Yeah, I just layered my voice a bunch. So here's like a screenshot of my Audacity project of just all of the layers of my voices. If you reverse the track and then put reverb on it and then reverse it back to playing forward, there's some interesting textural qualities. There's all sorts of processing again that had to be done. And then I pulled some ambient like tonal stuff from that sound library that I have access to, and I put it underneath it just to give it something more on like the low end. So there's sort of these like waves of textures that come out that were not provided by my voice. Every time the witch shows up, there is this Ligeti sounding soundtrack, and that's me layering a bunch of my voice, doing all these things. And honestly, when you hear all of them independently, it sounds fucking terrible. I'm not even gonna play it for you guys. But when you put all of them together, it really is fascinating how something like that can sort of become this really haunting texture. And I don't know, I was pretty happy with it. I'm pretty proud of that thing. So those are all the things that I spent money on for this game. I might be missing like a model or two from some weird site, but more or less the budget that I just went through and the things that I told you that I used for this project, that's kind of everything. That's everything it took to sort of expedite the process of developing a game like this. Otherwise, that would have been a shit ton of work. I can't even imagine how much work it would have been if I would have had to have make all those things by hand, like from scratch, from nothing on my own. Some of those things I don't even quite have like the skill set to do of like that level of quality. So it's great to just have that. And really the combination of all of them and the way you tweak those things, it can really make each of the parts just individually unique. You know, you don't have to use them out of the box. But that being said, I was also using tools that I've owned for a while. I'm thinking of Pixel Crush's dialogue system, and then PlayMaker, of course, and these things add up. I used Master Audio, Easy Collider, and probably several other things that I'm not forgetting, but even those assets alone, right, like together, I mean, I think it's close to, like, the total is probably close to something like $300. Now, I bought those a while ago, and I've used them on so many projects. So there are two totals. There's the one where it's like, you look at the price of all the things that I bought specifically for this project, and then you look at the price of all those plus the things that I bought before this project for other things. When you start looking at it that way, you kind of get into a territory of like, well, what about the courses that I paid for? You know, I've paid for an education for myself, learning how to use things. And then you start getting into the territory of like, well, what about the actual hours that you've put in just learning by doing, right? Like those are hours that, like, a kind of time is money way of thinking, right? Yeah, so overall, you can look at these two prices as a more fair rundown of what you might say the budget was for this game. Surely by now, you've noticed that I'm somewhere different. I'm in my new little Airbnb. I left Shinjuku, so I was there for a month. It's already been over a month since I've been here in Tokyo. And now I am in, technically this is Taito. I'm right between like Akihabara and Asakusa. So I'm finally working on the next game. So just to catch you up to speed a little bit, I know this is the Witch Games devlog, but just to catch you up to speed a little bit, at the beginning of this video, you'll have heard me say like, oh, I finished the Witch game and I shipped it off and it's done and I just have to wait for Steam, right? And they get back to you within like a week or so. But one, it was the holidays. And then two, when they did get back to me, they didn't approve the build because in the form I had to say that there was depictions of suicide and they couldn't find the depictions of suicide. And so they said, oh, send us like a save state or something or tell us how or whatever. And I was like, well, I can't really send you a save state because the game doesn't work like that. But if it helps, the depiction of suicide in this game is just like you eat poison and like your screen fades to black. I sent that note back to them and then it took about another week for them to get back to me and approve it. So it's approved right now. And so currently on my Steamworks dashboard, I can hit the release app button and I guess we'll just do that on camera. I suppose I should go and hit the release app, but let's do that right now. Test. Okay, let's do it. Let's just fucking release my game. All right, so here's my Witch Stories page. It says approved for release. Select the button below when you're ready to make your title available on Steam. Okay, so I'm gonna hit the release app button. Okay, here we go. If you are ready to release your app, make it available to customers immediately. Please type the phrase release my app. I almost like don't want this to be like any like particularly momentous thing, but it's like kind of a big deal for me. This is the first game I've ever released on Steam. I've released games on itch, but this is the first game I've kind of like put a lot of like blood, sweat, and tears into that the public's actually gonna be able to play. I wish I had like a fucking shot glass or a Suntory highball or something, but I'll raise a fake glass and I'll say, fuck it, and to many, many more, right? Because that's what this whole project is gonna be, right? The plan is that I'm gonna be making quite a few more games, basically like one a month. And so I'm gonna do this once a month if everything goes according to plan. I don't know, to many more is what I'll say. Okay, so let's do it. Release now. Request failed with an unknown error? Contact Steam Publishing. What the fuck? Hold on, let me refresh the page. That's crazy, yo. Hold up. Let me go to release right now. Release my app. Release now. The wheel is just spinning. All publishing tasks have been completed. Your application is now visible on the Steam store. Okay, so that's it. Go buy my little game. Go play it. It's done. I gotta like get to work on Akihabara Overclockers. I've been working on it very diligently, and I need to get to it like right now. Go enjoy Witch Stories. Talk to you soon.